And now we're going to go to Philippe Morin, who's Chief Executive Officer of EXFO. And Philippe is going to talk about 5G getting personal. User experiences revenue, he says. Thank you. Over to you, Philippe.
So yeah, Annie, thank you for inviting us. And then I want to thank obviously Mobile Europe for this opportunity. Again, so just maybe I'll start off with a few introduction first. As Annie pointed out, I'm from EXFO. I'm the CEO. EXFO has been a company that for the past 30 years have been helping service providers build optical and wireless networks. And really, in the past decade, we've moved and expanded our relevancy by providing monitoring tools, troubleshooting tools, and really helping assure quality of service and quality of experience for mainly the service providers. I've been in this telecom industry for 30 years now, and what I would say is, I've witnessed two major transformations during those 30 years. The first one was around optical, where as an industry we provided a much more cost-effective way to transport bits per kilometer, which really triggered the internet and being able to link data centers and ultimately being where we are today on communication. The other one is obviously the whole wireless transformation. I'll put 3G, 4G there, where obviously it created a whole new revenue stream and applications for voice and data in the industry. I do feel now that we're 5G, which I'm very bullish about. We're entering a new, very important phase of growth and transformation for the telecom industry, a growth that has created a lot of expectations. And this is where, the title of my chart is 5G gets personal, and how the user experience is going to be actually much more, not just about customer experience, but user expectations that have actually increased and substantially increased. And therefore, I'm going to really focus for the next 15 minutes on how, as an industry, we must meet the 5G expectations. And so I'll use, to start off, one of my favorite use case that I usually talk about to leverage the example of where 5G is going to come in. And that's around healthcare and emergency response. And so if I go to the first stats, 65% of life-threatening events happen outside of hospital. So obviously this is the hospitals where you get the prime type of care. So minutes matter. For every minute that you actually have to get to the hospital is where most of the treatments are being taken place and are really at the level that you would expect. And a couple of other statistics I want to share with you. As an example, the first one is from the Journal of American Heart Association that effectively said that in order to, if you can actually get treatment in less than 7 minutes upon the beginning of your cardiac arrest, you can double your survival rate. And on the other study there from the UK NHS study, every 15 minutes that you can actually provide in terms of treatment, you ultimately save 3 years of life. The opposite is if you're delayed by 15 minutes, every 15 minutes of delay will cost 3 years of life to the person. And so this is where obviously a 5G enabled emergency response, a 5G enabled ambulance, where ultimately now you can get to a point where it's a hospital without boundaries, where you can start getting into a virtual emergency room, smart ambulance that may not be connected back into the hospital so that you can get treatment right away. And so the clock absolutely starts when the right care begins. And so again, as you know, one of the first use cases that certain operators are looking at is exactly that. So a combination of connecting the ambulance, but applications around it where you're going to be providing high definition video, getting access to doctors right away in the ambulance so that you can actually start treatment right away. And ultimately, if that treatment could really start in the ambulance, in that 5G enabled ambulance, statistically, what's been proven is that there'd be over 2.2 million lives that can be saved just last year alone. And so I always like to use that example. I think people is pretty understand that that's the difference between what today, what you're lacking in terms of the protocols, to where 5G can really enable, by a combination of the ecosystem, a much more better emergency response capability. And that's where I see that 5G is now getting personal. And so what do I mean by that? Well, 5G is going to have to be about meeting individual expectations. But the expectation of the individuals are actually different now. The individuals are human and machine. And these are the type of applications that, we're going to be looking at, whether it's remote surgery, whether it's manufacturing 4.0 or emergency responses or surveillance and so on. And what's important to me is the time is now. As an industry, we have this great opportunity to really meet those expectations. But I'll give you a couple of examples. Humans are very tolerant. So if I give an example, if you're on your voice call and you lose your conversation, well, you just redial, and most of us won't even bother reporting that issue. If you're a machine that is actually delivering a critical application such as remote surgery, machines won't be as tolerant. Machines are obviously going to be absolutely dependent on a reliability, on a performance of the network, that in order to make sure that this life critical application is going to be meeting the expectations. And so this is why I'm saying that the user's expectation for 5G are quite different now than what we've seen in previous generation of wireless. And so I think we've all seen this, but I wanted to reiterate again, why is that important? Why is the machine and the individual different? Because if you actually look at the forecast, and this is a source from Ericsson, we all have seen this, where if you only look at the mobile consumer revenue growth for potential for 5G, we only see about 1.5% growth that 5G will actually enable. However, if you start leveraging the technology and combining the technology of 5G with other technologies, focusing on enterprise business cases, we now see the opportunity to grow by 35%. And so for me, 5G enables billions of connectivity into a really reliable and fast mobile. But when you combine that to AI, you combine that with devices that can be connected, you now bring those applications much closer to the consumer through the help of hyperscalers that can provide a multi-access edge computing, MECs or data centers. And the combination, then you start bringing automation capability. You now start enabling new applications that will fuel this revenue growth. And again, as now I say a very senior veteran into this industry, I really feel that the combination of all of these technologies and protocols and applications are really going to be fueling the growth of 5G and for our industry. And so with it, an ecosystem is being formed. I think there's not a week now that you're seeing announcements around service providers partnering with hyperscalers to provide the data center infrastructure, whether it's on the multi-access edge or data centers. You're seeing new industries coming into applications and being enabled by 5G private networks, whether it's in agriculture, healthcare, as I just mentioned, the 5G ambulance example, or manufacturing 4.0. And with it comes system integrators that are going to help provide the end-to-end solution by working with network vendors, service providers, and hyperscalers. And really, for me, what 5G potentially will bring is a software platform. Once it's all designed and developed, a software platform that would allow application developers to come in and generate new applications that will fuel this growth that I just talked about. So that's the good news about the 5G ecosystems being formed. But when we double click on 5G ecosystem, there is a need as an industry to really link all of these players and all of these functions into what I would call the 5G supply chain. And so what do I mean by that? Well, when you look back at 4G, the relationship between the service providers and the end user was a very direct one, allowing direct visibility of the quality of service, the quality of experience. As we now just talked about in the 5G ecosystem, that supply chain is becoming much more complex now, fueled by, first of all, a new architecture that is bringing the capability of disaggregating hardware from software, and with it, the segmentation of how the network could actually be supplied. And so I've tried to kind of summarize here at a high level from what we always talked about from 5G core all the way to the end user. But now I'm starting to portray all of these actors in the ecosystem that I've talked about, that in order for them or for everyone, for the application to be delivered with the right quality of experience and the right expectation, that supply chain needs to be running very smoothly. Because if one of the supply chain fails, one of those links fail, because the data is not available or the data is not being shared, the links will be out of sync. And again, the application and the expectation of the application I just talked about from mainly machines will not be tolerant and won't be able to effectively execute on the promise of the application. So now what we really need in order to meet that user experience and the user expectation is that 5G supply chain needs to be a well-connected, smart supply chain. That each link needs data to align itself and done in a real-time dynamic way. Now, the good news is 5G is a data-driven protocol, very data-rich. We have, as an example, NWDAF, 3GPP 5G data source, which is really a network data analytics that function from core networks. We have observability that allows to monitor the internal state of a particular network functions. Tracing that allows you to monitor end-to-end flows of what an application might be leveraging. Cloud native probes providing user data down to the cell phone, the call trace. And then as you see, the N1 to N6 interfaces that ultimately provide from core to RAN to user plane to control plane type of information. And then tons of more information coming from all the network functions telemetry. That's the good news. Very data driven, lots of data available. One of the challenge is all of these data repositories are operating in silos. Most of them don't do streaming. Most of them are not really in real time or do it within their own functions only. And so what we have is we have lots of data. We have big data lakes. But where we're missing is what I would call the little data, the relevant data that allows us to make sure that that supply chain can work flawlessly in an automated way. And so if we don't have that data in real time, in the right context, everyone will suffer. Everyone in that ecosystem, everyone in that food chain, including obviously the end user running that application. So what is the solution? So we really believe that in order to meet the new 5G user expectations, that there is absolutely a way that if you can get the data source of all of these different data repositories I just talked about, through some AI and applications, there is the capability to provide all the relevant data to all the relevant links so that dynamically that supply chain can be delivered with the right data at the right time. Now, there is a big dependency to be able to do this. And this is a bit a call to action for me and a call to action from an industry point of view, because often we talk about the whole applications and business cases, but underneath it, I hate to use the word plumbing, but underneath that supply chain needs to be put in place so that it can run efficiently And in order to do that, as I just mentioned, we need for a connected 5G supply chain, a smart 5G supply chain, that the data needs to be open. And this is a bit of a challenge we will have, because already by design, some of these the data sources are not designed to be shared. Some of them are very easily could be encrypted by certain vendors that will ultimately would prefer keeping that information. But as we bring, as an example, cloud infrastructure into the mix, as we bring more multi-access edge computing into the mix, having those infrastructure presenting data so that we can offer and present to the service providers, or the providers can actually see a true end-to-end visibility from the beginning of the core all the way to the end user through all these cloud infrastructure, will be really important. And so in conclusion, what really we believe here is that if, in order for all of the ecosystems, whether it's the hyperscalers, the MNOs, the transportation industries, to the manufacturing industries and healthcare, in order for us to not just meet 5G expectations, but exceed 5G expectations, opening up the data of all these different data sources, working together as an industry so that ultimately we can provide and get visibility of the true heartbeat of that 5G supply chain, so that we can actually exceed the 5G expectations. Thank you very much. Annie, over to you.
Philippe, thank you. One of my questions, actually, and it's not about the technology, is about working in ecosystems, which seems to me to be a really sticky, as in difficult subject, because we're not talking from the telco end of things. We're not used to it. We're used to being in control of our own destiny. And I think as well, somebody explained the other day that it's not about the telco or any one party taking the lead. Actually, the model we're striving for to get the innovation, which is the point of this, right, is to see what everybody in the ecosystem can do really well, rather than one dominant company, whoever that party is, figuring out how other people's stuff fits in with what they can do. And I mean, this is a great idea, but how on earth do you make it happen? I mean, this is tough.
Well, it's a good question, but I always ultimately believe that the customer will drive that answer. If I'm a customer that wants a particular application into my own private network, I know exactly how I operate my business, I know exactly what I need. I think they will ultimately make the decision on who will help me bring that ecosystem together. If that customer has an amazing relationship with the service providers and have trust that the service providers will be able to bring that ecosystem together, then they will make it happen. But where you've got a really good point, no one's got that expertise of end to end. And so I do think that the ecosystem is going to have to work together. That's why you see all these partnerships being announced, because there is some what I would call pre-integration works that needs to be done. But I also do believe that the ecosystem needs to work together as well to make sure that data becomes available. We talked just before me with the Open RAN and how we can ultimately leverage the data from the RAN to monitor the energy level that we're using and so on. I think there is, as I said, the really good news is 5G is data rich, but that 5G ecosystem needs to make sure that the data is available so that the ecosystem can deliver a solution for the customer.
Okay, we have a question. One of our delegates has asked, how do you handle the GDPR implications of sharing the data, which is quite a serious issue, right?
It's a very serious issue, security, and I'll expand even the question of the security itself because there is data. So GDPR and security are going to be really important. I think there's data sources that ultimately will have to be into a GDPR environment, have to be really careful how they're being used and ultimately not being used. But there's, again, tremendous amount of data, anonymized data that is available from the network functions, from the network that we'll be able to use without having to go down to user level data and privacy type of data. So I think the point is getting the right data that is really relevant for the particular applications that you need to drive. But GDPR security absolutely have to be, it's table stakes that we'll need to take into account as you start deploying these applications.
Do you think that's the widely recognized thing, that this approach to security, as you've just described, do you think people do understand that's table stakes?
I think people understand that security is table stakes. I think the challenge is how do you actually deliver a solution by making sure you take that into account and not in the trade-off of not being able to run that application efficiently or even with more value add because of GDPR or because of security. That's to me the real challenge at hand.
So I've been in telecoms a long time, and a trend I have noticed, which Gartner really made a lot of money out of, is this, we talk about stuff and we get super excited and then nothing happens. So you go into that slough of despond or whatever it is Gartner calls it, when we get disillusioned and fed up. And then it's like an overnight success. Suddenly, whatever it is happens, you know, it's 30 years of practice to become an overnight success, same thing. And I'm just wondering what you feel the tipping point, because the stock figures you gave, the difference between a 1.5 increase in revenue and 35%, I mean, that's a huge, huge gap. What do you think is kind of going to get us on the, you know, downward, you know, going downhill on this instead of struggling uphill?
I'm like you, I've been in the industry now for a long time, and I really feel that there are these tipping points that occur that really make a difference. And part of it is triggered by the technology. When is the technology mature enough that allows you to actually start delivering those promises? Let's be clear, the 5G standalone is the real trigger. The 5G standalone architecture for me is the real trigger to get to that tipping point. When we're in non-standalone mode, it was really into that 1.5% growth. As you move into now a completely open cloud native architecture that allows you to bring now AI, allows you to bring automation, allows you to bring spectrum being available, you're now starting to see that what I will call that rolling tipping point in action. And we're starting to see now more private networks being built, more use cases people are coming back with. So I think, you know, and we as being part of the vendor community, we're starting to see many more RFQs and RFPs showing that there is a market now. It's not just let's do a proof of concept. We are going to deploy this, and so I am bullish that we're going to start seeing that growth really coming in our next calendar year, 2022. With
2022, that's very soon.
It's very soon, and I do believe it's a combination of the economies turning back and rebounding very, very quickly, as you're seeing in the US and in the UK. And I think the technology is getting there, and that's why you're seeing the first phase of being the private networks build out. And yeah, so I've been pretty bullish that we're going to start seeing some nice growth starting 2022.
Interesting. We have some more questions here. One of our delegates asks, which forum is likely to drive the data sharing transformation through GPP standardization, government initiatives like the EU digital markets / data sovereignty, private initiatives emerging from hyperscalers, or maybe all of the above and more?
Maybe all of the above. I think the challenge with 3GPP, everyone's trying to do the right things, and everyone's coming in with, we got to share the data. So I don't think my ask for the action to the community here is new. The real challenge is how do we bring that data together from all of the 3GPP, from the government regulations to ultimately the hyperscalers, the network equipment vendors as well, you know, that are out there providing a solution. And you know, my hope is, again, customers will drive this. The first phase of this will be driven by the customers. We'll want to make sure in order to make that application work, that data will need to be shared. But ultimately, I do think that as an industry, I do hope maybe more on the 3GPP side that will happen. But there's really difficulty. I'll just give you an example. MWDAF, which is a 3GPP1, which provides analytics, doesn't do 4G, 3G, which, all networks are going to have different technologies. So it won't be all a greenfield 5G. Doesn't do real-time streaming capability. So there are things that we're going to have to, as an industry, continue to work and adapt based on the applications that the end users, including the machine, will want us to deliver.
Okay, and still on the data. One of our delegates observes that even during the pandemic crisis, there's not been that much evidence of good working practices of data sharing in Europe. In comparison, some Asiatic countries, it was a different story, but that's because the whole approach often to data privacy and individuals' rights, etc., concerning data is a different kettle of fish. So would such data sharing agreements better be performed among private entities only, that is with a direct agreement from end users, instead of relying on government decisions?
Yeah, so I want to make the distinction. The data that I'm talking about here is not exactly that type of data. Here, what we're talking about is individual data, how, during the pandemic, how people were, their geolocation and so on. What I'm really talking here is the network data, the network function data coming from the applications that ultimately are that 5G supply chain. So there's a bit of that distinction here. What I'm talking is the data to make sure that the supply chain delivers the applications ultimately that are going to be required. Here, your questions are really the data from the applications, the end user applications.
So you're kind of talking from the going outwards, not coming inwards, if you see what I mean. Okay.
That data privacy question and government really is much more, even more important than what I talked about earlier about GDPR and security, because there, from the network, there is information, to be clear, there is information from the end user that you can see the cell phone numbers, you can see the type of application they might be, but that is more and more anonymized, but you got to take that into account from a GDPR point of view.
Okay, Philippe, I'm sorry to say we're out of time, but thank you very much. Very interesting, a lot to think about in there.
Yeah, well, thank you very much again for giving us a chance to present to you. Thank you, Annie.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.